It was a hot afternoon, and the railway carriage was correspondingly sultry, and the next stop was at Templecombe, nearly an hour ahead. The occupants of the carriage were a small girl, a smaller girl, and a small boy. An aunt belonging to the children occupied one corner seat, and the further corner seat, on the opposite side, it was occupied by a bachelor who was a stranger to their party. But the small girls and the small boy emphatically occupied the compartment. You know what I mean by that? Both the aunt and the children were conversational in a limited, persistent way, reminding one of the attentions of a housefly and refused to be discouraged. Most of the aunt's remarks seemed to begin with "don't," and nearly all of the children's remarks began with "why." The bachelor said nothing out loud. "Don't, Cyril, don't," said the aunt, as a small boy began smacking the cushions of the seat, producing a cloud of dust at each blow. "Come and look out of the window," she said. The child moved reluctantly to the window. "Why are those sheep being driven out of that field?" "I expect they're being driven to another field where there's more grass," said the aunt weakly. "There's lots of grass in that field. There's nothing else but grass there. Auntie, there's lots of grass in that field." "Perhaps the grass in the other field is better." "Why is it better?" "Oh, look at those cows," said the aunt. Nearly every field along the line had contained either cows or bulls, but she spoke as though she were drawing attention to a rarity. "Why is the grass in the other field better?" said Cyril. The frown on the bachelor's face was deepening to a scowl. He was a hard, unsympathetic man, the aunt decided in her mind. She was utterly unable to come to any satisfactory decision about the grass in the other field. The smaller girl now created a diversion by beginning to recite "On the Road to Mandalay." She only knew the first line, but she put her limited knowledge to the fullest possible use by repeating the line over and over and over again in a dreamy but resolute and very audible voice. It seemed to the bachelor as though someone had had a bet with her that she could not repeat the line 2,000 times without stopping, and whoever who had made the wager was likely to lose the bet. "Come over here and listen to a story," said the aunt, and the bachelor looked twice at her and once at the communication cord. The children moved listlessly toward the aunt's end of the carriage. Evidently her reputation as a storyteller did not rank high in their estimation. In a low, confidential voice, interrupted at frequent intervals by loud, petulant questions from her listeners, she began an unenterprising and deplorably uninteresting story about a little girl who was very good and made friends with everyone on account of her goodness, and was finally saved from a mad bull by a number of rescuers who admired her moral character. "Wouldn't they have saved her if she hadn't been good?" demanded the bigger of the small girls, which was exactly the question the bachelor had been wanting to ask. Yes, but I don't think they would have run quite so fast to help her if they hadn't liked her so very much." "That's the stupidest story I've ever heard," said the girl. "I didn't listen after the first bit, it's so stupid," said Cyril. The smaller girl made no actual comment to the story, but she'd long ago recommenced a murmured repetition of her favorite line. "You don't seem to be a success as a storyteller," the bachelor said suddenly. The aunt bristled in instant defense of this unexpected attack. "It's a very difficult thing to tell stories that children can both understand and appreciate." "I don't agree." "Oh, then perhaps you would like to tell them the story." "Yes, tell us the story," said the bigger of the small girls. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Bertha who was extraordinarily good." The children's momentarily aroused interest began at once to flicker. All stories were starting to seem dreadfully alike. She did all that she was told. She was always truthful. She kept her clothes clean, ate milk puddings as though they were jam tarts, learned her lessons perfectly, and was polite in all her manners. Was she pretty? Not as pretty as any of you, but she was horribly good. There was a wave of reaction in favor of the story. The word horrible, in connection with goodness, is a novelty that commended itself. It seemed to introduce a ring of truth that was absent from the aunt's tales of infant life. She was so good that she won several awards for goodness, which she always wore pinned on her dress. There was a medal for obedience, another medal for punctuality, and a third for good behavior. There were large metal medals, and they clicked against one another as she walked. No other child in the town where she lived had as many as 3 medals, so everybody knew she must be an extra good child. Horribly good, said Cyril. Yeah. Everybody talked about her goodness, and the prince of the country got to hear about it, and he said that as she was so very good, she might be allowed once a week to walk in his park, which was just outside the town. It was a beautiful park, and no children were ever allowed in it, so it was a great honor for Bertha to be allowed to go there. Were there any sheep in the park? Said Cyril. No. There were no sheep. Why weren't there any sheep? Came the inevitable question. The aunt permitted herself to smile, which might almost have been described as a grin. There were no sheep in the park because the prince's mother had once had a dream that her son would either be killed by a sheep or else by a clock falling on him. And for that reason, the prince never kept a sheep in his park or a clock in his palace. Ooh. The aunt suppressed a gasp of admiration. Was the prince killed by a sheep or a clock? Said Cyril. Well, he is still alive, so we cannot tell whether the dream will come true. Anyway, there were no sheep in the park, but there were lots of little pigs running all over the place. What color were they? Black with white faces, white with black spots, black all over, gray with white patches, and some were white all over. The storyteller paused to let a full idea of the park's treasures sink into the children's imaginations and then resumed. Bertha was rather sorry to find there were no flowers in the park. She had promised her aunt, with tears in her eyes, that she would not pick any of the kind prince's flowers. And she had meant to keep her promise, so of course it made her feel rather silly to find there were no flowers to pick. Why weren't there any flowers? Because the pigs had eaten them all. The gardeners had told the prince that you couldn't have pigs and flowers, so he decided to have pigs and no flowers. There was a murmur of approval at the excellence of the prince's decision. So many people would have chosen the other way. There were lots of other delightful things in the park. There were ponds with gold and blue and green fish in them, and trees with beautiful parrots that said clever things at a moment's notice, hummingbirds that hummed all the popular tunes of the day. Bertha walked up and down and enjoyed herself immensely and thought to herself, if I were not so extraordinarily good, I should not have been allowed to come into this beautiful park and enjoy all there is to be seen in it. And her 3 medals clicked against one another as she walked and helped to remind her how very good she really was. Just then an enormous wolf came prowling into the park to see if it could catch a fat little pig for its supper. What color was it?